A single poorly designed test can just completely derail a student's confidence. And on the flip side, it gives us educators entirely false data about what learning is actually happening. Welcome to this collaborative explainer. I'm Dr. Alina Rostova, a language assessment lecturer, and today we're diving into the incredibly vital, high-stakes world of test and assessment design. And I'm not alone. Joining me to bridge the gap between assessment theory and actual classroom practice are two fantastic colleagues. We've got Sarah, a postgraduate TESOL student with a seriously sharp eye for assessment frameworks.
Hey everyone, I'm so thrilled to be here and really dig into the technical side of test construction today.
And we also have David, an early career language teacher who's right there on the front lines, navigating the messy, beautiful realities of the classroom every single day.
Hi folks, I'm definitely looking forward to turning these big postgraduate theories into something I can actually use to support my students tomorrow.
So our foundation today is Chapter 3 of Ayak Pakidi's 2025 text, Language Testing and Assessment, published by Bloomsbury Academic. It's basically considered a gold standard in postgraduate study right now, mostly because it brilliantly bridges rigorous psychometric theory with the practical realities of language education. It doesn't just, tell you what a good test is, it actually breaks down exactly how to generate meaningful assessment results.
And honestly, as a teacher, that is exactly why I value this text. It doesn't just live up in the academic clouds. Like, I'm currently trying to develop a reliable EAL, English as an Additional Language, reading and speaking test for my midterms. I really need to know that these theoretical frameworks can actually survive the reality of my super busy classroom.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're taking Pakidi's academic rigor and applying it directly to your real-world EL scenario. But before we get into the technical weeds, let's establish our true north. We're anchoring our design journey on 3 core principles today. First, assessment design must always, and I mean always, start with a clear purpose. Second, your assessment specifications act as your generative blueprint. And third, assessment isn't just a one-and-done event. It absolutely requires a continuous cycle of evaluation and piloting to truly work. To reach those goals, here is our roadmap. We'll move systematically through 5 areas, starting with purpose and construct alignment, then developing assessment specifications, designing tasks for skills, scoring and practical considerations, and finally, the assessment development cycle. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Purpose and Construct Alignment. And this brings us right to my current challenge. You're staring at a blank screen trying to design a midterm EAL test, and it's completely overwhelming. Where do I even begin?
It is such a universal feeling. But as Fakidi points out, you simply cannot design a valid test until you know exactly why you're testing. Like, is this for placement? Is it a diagnostic to find specific learning gaps? Or is it an achievement test meant to measure what they've learned so far in your curriculum?
For me, it's definitely an achievement test. I just need to know if they've met our specific course learning outcomes for the term.
Perfect. And once you know that purpose, you have to define exactly what language ability you're actually measuring.
And that brings us to a really foundational concept in assessment, the construct. A construct is an abstract concept. We're talking about things like communicative competence or reading fluency. You can't just crack open a student's brain and directly observe their communicative competence. Instead, you have to infer it through carefully designed observations of their language behaviors or performance.
Right. And a major risk here is something we call construct underrepresentation. Imagine your construct is communicative competence, but your test only asks students to conjugate verbs on a piece of paper. You're really only measuring a tiny, isolated fragment of the construct, which kind of makes the whole assessment inherently flawed.
And that is literally my biggest fear. How do I ensure my assessment task actually matches my learning outcomes? Like, if I give my AL students a multiple choice reading test, am I really measuring their reading ability? Or am I just measuring how well they can guess or how good they are at taking tests?
Oh, you are hitting the nail on the head. You're describing the danger of construct irrelevant variance. This is when outside factors completely distort the score. Maybe the test font is too small, or the cultural context of the reading passage is entirely unfamiliar, so you end up measuring their background knowledge rather than their actual reading skill. The crucial point here is alignment. Your learning outcomes, the language constructs you define, and the actual assessment tasks must be in perfect alignment to avoid this.
So, moving to Section 2, Developing Assessment Specifications. Once that alignment is locked in, we enter the highly technical phase of the process, which is creating your blueprint. Fakidi provides a brilliant framework for this. It forces you to map out everything systematically. It defines the purpose, like an achievement test. It specifies the target population, say intermediate young adults, and it clearly lists the specific construct, like reading for main ideas versus reading for specific details.
Oh, I see. And then it literally lists the task types like multiple choice or gap filling alongside the exact scoring procedures. Wow, it is truly like an architectural blueprint for a house, but for a test.
Precisely. If you skip this step, and believe me, it happens far too often in the real world, you end up with a test that just wanders totally off topic. The specifications force discipline into the entire design process. Dr. Alina Rostova, Davidson famously calls specifications a generative blueprint. And that word generative is incredibly powerful.
It really is. If you have a solid set of specifications, you or any other teacher in your department can use them next year or even 5 years from now to generate a totally new test that is parallel, fair, and reliable. You aren't just designing one isolated quiz. You're actually designing an equitable system that saves the entire department massive amounts of time over the long run.
Okay, into section 3, designing tasks for skills. I have my generative blueprint. That makes me feel way more organized. But how do I actually choose the tasks for my reading and speaking EAL assessment? Because there are just so many potential formats. This introduces a classic debate in testing, restricted response versus constructed response. Restricted response tasks, things like multiple choice or true-false, are highly reliable, super efficient, and completely objective to score. But the big downside is they allow for guessing, and they don't always represent authentic language use.
Right, because in the real world, nobody gives you 4 multiple choice options when you're trying to negotiate a problem at work or order food at a restaurant. That's where constructed response comes in, right? Like essays or oral interviews. They evaluate those higher order language skills in a much more authentic way.
Exactly. But the trade-off is they are incredibly complex, highly subjective, and very time-consuming to score. For your EL test, David, you really have to weigh these pros and cons to balance reliability and efficiency with true communicative authenticity. And remember, task formats generally pair with specific language skills. Receptive skills like reading often use gap filling and multiple choice. Writing typically utilizes essays or reports. Listening heavily relies on information transfer tasks like, filling out a chart while listening to a lecture. And speaking usually involves interviews or role plays. But for a postgraduate standard, we also highly value integrated tasks. This is where a student might listen to a short academic lecture and then write a summary report. Fakidi emphasizes that integrated tasks are often the absolute most reflective of authentic, real-world academic language use. Which brings us to Section 4, scoring and practical considerations. Because, of course, designing the task is only half the battle. Now we actually have to mark it and survive the administrative constraints of a real educational setting. And this immediately brings back my anxiety. Grading consistency. If I have 60 students doing a speaking role play, how on earth do I make sure I'm grading student number 60 the exact same fair way I graded student number 1?
That is the core challenge of subjective scoring. To do it fairly, you absolutely must use well-designed scoring rubrics. For your EL classroom, you'd really want to contrast holistic rubrics, which just give one overall score, with analytic rubrics. Analytic rubrics break down the criteria into distinct categories, like fluency, vocabulary, and grammar. This is far better for you because it allows you to give precise diagnostic feedback to each student, ensuring much higher score consistency compared to just slapping a single holistic grade on it.
Fakidi also introduces a really fascinating concept regarding how students experience the test, called the interior design of an assessment. It operates on 3 distinct levels. First is visceral, the appearance and immediate emotional reaction. Imagine handing out a poorly photocopied test where the images are blurry and the font is tiny. The students experience a visceral failure right then and there. They panic, test anxiety spikes, and the results are immediately invalidated. Second is behavioral, the usability of the test. If the test instructions are overly complex, students end up spending way more cognitive energy trying to understand what to do rather than demonstrating their actual language skills. Right, and the third level is reflective, the relevance. Do the students reflect on this and actually see the value in it? If they don't see how the test connects to their learning goals, their motivation just plummets. Fikari notes that practicality relates to feasibility and weighing cost and time. This is a huge reality check for me. I might design the most authentic, beautiful, role-play speaking assessment ever conceived, but if it takes me 20 minutes per student and I have 60 students, it is practically impossible for one teacher to deliver. I constantly have to balance ideal test design with my real-world constraints of time, resources, and honestly, my own energy. And to balance that ideal design with your classroom reality, we rely on Section 5, the Assessment Development Cycle. It's a cohesive, systematic approach. So, looking at the cycle, we've talked through identifying the purpose and construct, developing your specifications blueprint, designing the tasks, and creating the analytic scoring rubrics. But the step that absolutely makes or breaks the entire process is piloting and reviewing.
Oh, for sure. It is the most crucial yet most frequently skipped step. I once oversaw a high-stakes placement test where the department decided to skip the pilot phase. Well, they only discovered on test day that the audio files for the listening section echoed terribly in the operational testing hall. Piloting in the actual environment helps you catch those catastrophic formatting issues, unrealistic time limits, or confusing instructions before they cause a massive disaster.
Let's bring this all together. Our 3 core takeaways today are: first, effective assessment design must always align with a specific, clearly defined purpose and construct to avoid irrelevant variance. Second, developing specifications is non-negotiable. They literally act as your generative blueprint for reliable, scalable tests. And third, testing is never perfect on the first try. It absolutely requires a continuous cycle of piloting, reviewing, and evaluating. This deep dive has been incredibly clarifying for my EAL test planning. I want to leave everyone watching with a question to ponder for your own practice. How will your next assessment design reflect both the ideal standards of validity and reliability and your real-world classroom reality of time and resources?
What a fantastic reflection to end on. Thank you to Sarah and David for helping bring this theory out of the textbook and directly into the classroom. And thank you all for joining us on this explainer. Until next time, happy assessing.